All right, hello everyone. Mark Despotakis here with you, and today we have a really interesting topic for you, and we're going to delve into what that is here in a minute. But first, I want to introduce our guest who's going to talk about that. It's Brandi Waller-Pace, and she is from Decolonizing the Music Room. Well, she's from a lot of places, actually. Currently from Fort Worth, Texas, is where she's talking to us from. But where I came to find out about her was this website and this Facebook group, social media, Decolonizing the Music Room. We're going to talk about what that is here coming up and what you can learn from it in a minute. But first, I want to give Brandi a second to kind of give us the thumbnail sketch of what your background is as far as music education, because you are a music educator.
Yeah. I got to music education in a slightly roundabout way. I have my undergrad and master's degrees in jazz studies. I went to Howard University and got married. My husband's family's down here in Fort Worth, so we moved down here. Up until that point, I had done private lesson teaching. I was a graduate assistant, had done some vocal classes like performance groups. When I got down here, you're grown, you have a family, you have to take care of yourself. So for me, it was like, what's something I actually enjoy and feel like I can connect to doing day in, day out, where I can actually like survive, right? And so I was like, you know what? Why don't I try to go into the classroom? Because I've dealt with children, I've dealt with music, I've dealt with education. I actually want to learn about it. So I got alternatively certified and I started with fifth and sixth graders, kind of general music, kind of choir. Realized that pedagogy wise, I was lacking a lot. And so I started training and training and training as I was on the job and started to really get a better sense of how to fill in the practical performance experience I had and the interpersonal experience I had with like really solid information pedagogy wise. And so since then, I've taught and I've done some, like jazz choir stuff outside of the school district, and moved to elementary, stayed there for 10 years, and actually recently just left the classroom to start a PhD program in music ed.
Okay, so it's kind of the whole spectrum of music ed, which is awesome. Um, Before we kind of delve into what decolonizing the music room is, I had listened to another interview that you had done earlier this summer, and you had talked about your experience at Howard University, and you
Yeah.
said that you felt that it was a different experience, that you gained more there than you might have somewhere else. And the conversation moved on, so you didn't get to go back and discuss that. So I'm just curious what that meant. I was left wanting some more information there.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm answering you properly. Will you say once more? Because I don't want to go off on a tangent.
So, okay, I'm just curious about, you had mentioned that your time at Howard University, you felt that you got experiences there that were different than you would have received in a similar program elsewhere.
Got it. Yeah. Actually, I had a presentation not too long ago, and we talked about this a little bit. So, something that is super obviously different is as a black person, almost every teacher looked like me. I was taught not exclusively by black teachers, but almost everyone throughout my undergrad and graduate time was black. All different identities within blackness, but all representative of blackness. So there's a lot of cultural reflection for me because of that I felt was very valuable. And there were certain things about how the department was structured. So no matter what type of music you're majoring in, a core course for you is African and Afro American music literature. And so, it's at the beginning of our program that we're expected to learn about black music and cultural production throughout history. And that is supposed to be the baseline for us. Whereas for a lot of other people I
Mhm.
know, it's an elective if it's offered. And maybe after they finish learning a lot of stuff centered around white Western European traditions, then it's layered on top of it. Even in programs that, they might have studied jazz, so that might not even be a core part of their jazz program, even though it's so culturally tied to blackness. But for us, it was normal. I also took classical piano And every semester, there were black composers who were included. And, we played and learned about things that were considered more standard in the canon in a broad general sense, but I was always shown and had black composers highlighted for me. And I speak to blackness because this is historically black university. I'm black and I'm speaking from my own positionality because that black and white binary is can be problematic. But for me, those were very obvious core things. So identity wise, there was so much blackness around me and that was just kind of there. Whereas in other environments, if there are not many people who look like me or identify with me culturally, there is often a sense of othering, or there might be a hypervisibility or attention drawn to the way I stand out, or just like a complete unawareness of all the dynamics of functioning in more of an outsider role in the environment you're in. It didn't feel like that at school, and all the identity things I fleshed out, and all the, just being a, entitled kid and all that stuff you work through when you're that age.
Right.
I got to do without the added burden of how do I function as a black person in a space that doesn't have me in mind at all. I didn't have to have that in addition to just like growing and learning how to be a better human and be a good musician.
Okay.
And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, so that makes complete sense. And what's really interesting is to me is that provides some really good context to help to understand what you've done here with this decolonizing the music room project, or I don't know exactly what the right word would be for it.
It's a nonprofit.
Okay. Oh, so it's a
Yeah,
full. All
yeah.
right. So you're full. All right. I came to find the organization and very particularly you from a panel discussion that you had done earlier this summer. And I would say here we are in October, and I've probably watched it 5 times. And
Oh, which one was it?
it was there was like there was 6 of you in there, and it was just kind of just talking about it was a very open general discussion talking
Oh,
about
that one was ours. Okay,
yeah,
okay,
yeah. So the
yeah.
what and so I was, and I keep going back and watching it because I keep, getting something new each time because it was like an hour and a half or something. It was
Yeah,
really
and
long.
they had great stuff to say, right?
It was fantastic, and there were so many things that were so we'll link to it for sure so that folks can go and take a look at it. There were things that I was finding of that weren't even like music classroom related stuff. It was just general stuff of, oh, like there's okay, that's another way to think about XYZ, whatever
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is. Plus, then the stuff as it goes into the music room, which then led me to find decolonizing the music room and everything that you're doing. So that leads me into like what's the baseline question here of tell us what is decolonizing the music room.
Yeah, okay, so I'll kind of go through the super condensed timeline.
Okay.
Started as a website, founded it as a website, and we were still kind of deciding what is it going to be. I had a lot of help from contributors and people helping me flush out the idea I had. So the website picked up steam. I had a Facebook group. I think I'd had that group for 2 years, and it was just kind of dead and empty. But when the website came out, I made that group officially the website's group, and the dialogue started to pick up there. And then late 2019 is when we went through the 501c3 process. We got organized within the state as a nonprofit. Later in the year, in the very beginning of 2020, we were officially IRS 501c3. And so since then, we've grown to, the Facebook group functions as a discussion space, a dialogue space. It does a lot of different things, but we're trying to really rethink how those types of groups function and how they can function and how they can push for some deeper dialogue and engagement, because social media is still new, but it's not that new. We're starting to learn how to use it in different ways that hold a lot of meaning for people. Then we have the website, which for me personally, functions as a space to have really quality information, views that are presented in a way that is more palatable for people. Most of our readership is our teachers that are teaching full time within the classroom. So, you know, as a PhD student now, I'm like, man, when I was working, if I had to read this much stuff for every single thing I read, it would be really intense. So we go short format on purpose, just so we can pack that punch in something that people feel like they can consume if they don't feel like they have as much time or they can't devote a full course of study to something. And then we want to normalize compensation for labor. So we have a significant amount of funding that goes toward making sure contributors are actually compensated for their work. And then we present, and we've presented with nonprofit organizations and school districts and MEAs, and we are looking toward expanding our programming and having things that are broader and that we can afford to bring to people in a way that is more accessible than usual. I had amazing training when I was learning how to teach well, and I was lucky to be in a district that supplies so much funding. But I just think that if it was only up to me to pay for all of that, then I would be not very well trained. And so I know it'll take a while to get to a point, but I really hope that we can look toward having something that is very meaningful and also fairly heavily subsidized, so that there's not this access cutoff for everything that we do. And the website was kind of like the beginning idea of that, of not having to pay to take whatever specialized thing.
The website is just so resource rich. There's so many things on there, and it's one of those. I don't know what I didn't know, and as I'm looking, oh, okay, well, here's this is an interesting maybe jumping off point. Plus, the content you have on there is great, and the Facebook group is. I'm really interested in how you've done it, because there's so many things where I'll see someone will post a question and they will pose a question, but part of that posting is, but we are only asking for people, whatever, a very specific group to answer this question.
Yeah.
But everyone is welcome to read it. I mean, and that is put in there. And I think it's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I have amazing moderators of the group, and my deputy director, Lorelai Baptiste Long, is also an admin of the group. That line of questioning was actually brought from one of our moderators, Sarita Neal, who I can't remember what group she referenced, but there are some spaces that are modeling some really cool engagement ideas and norms, and that was one that she brought to us. And so I've really tried to keep a read on how Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian folks are feeling about the tone of the group. Like, do they feel safe there? Do they feel like they can speak? Because our mission is towards centering those voices. And so she brought up that idea, and I said, that sounds really good, because in music ed, I can't think of a space once I got out into teaching that is just that type of, where there's space to say, like, we just want to hear from you, and we're not here to insert our judgment on it or use it for whatever goal or for study or whatever. It's just like, here's a space for you to speak to something that has happened to you. That's just not something that gets to happen that much. So I'm so glad she brought up that idea, because it turned out a lot of people felt it was valuable for them to be able to speak to that stuff. And then there were a lot of people who, because, they can't comment, they can just process, had time to sit with, oh, wow, like this is a thing that happens. This is something that feels really regular. I'm noticing it being brought up over and over and over again. And it isn't a space for saying, well, here's the justification for it, or here's why it's not that bad, or whatever it is, right?
Right.
Or trying to center something away from the experience. It's just like, oh, we can just actually see what happens in those blind spots that we're not in our environments accustomed to making space for.
Yeah. So, and you make that great point of, so it's that good chance to, if you can be in the group, but then you realize there is a value in stepping back and just learning from what you're seeing. I think
Yeah.
that's really important.
And different spaces function differently, which I think is really cool.
Hmm.
But we have a lot of intention around how we particularly functions. Because we want certain goals, and I've gotten good feedback. Everybody doesn't love everything, but I've I've heard people tell me that they found value in having to rethink how they engage in certain ways online surrounding music ed and speaking with peers.
So you very much talk about the intentionality of the website and the Facebook group, and it's obvious. Um, but that leads into the segue of one of the topics that you talk about so much is intentionality in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk so much about understanding and knowing why we do things. Why do we teach, 6/8 time? Why do we do that? Why do we teach this piece of music? Why do we teach about this composer? So much about purpose and intentionality. And I've even heard you tell stories about in your classroom, in your elementary classroom, how you essentially got that feedback from you read the room basically,
Yeah.
and then you were so intentional in then realizing this is then what I should be providing to this student base. So I guess I'm just curious, how do we get more folks to adapt in that way? Do you have the magic answer to get folks to go in that direction? The secret
I
sauce?
think, yeah, I think it's such a broad process. So, um, I really hope that my students, who are still my babies but no longer my students, will grow up to remember that, and it'll guide their thinking. I'm really hoping that we, as a community, not just DTMR, will have a level of influence on what is considered baseline knowledge once people get into university programs, and the way that we treat critical thinking and the way that we treat looking at and analyzing and questioning what we're doing. I think only then, if that happens, from early schooling up through our university programs, will we start to have an environment where people are looking at things a certain way. Obviously, everyone's not going to reach the same conclusion when they do, but that level of intentionality and questioning behind what is happening is going to just become the norm. I can see students I've had for a certain length of time, I can watch the way that they talk to me about things after they've gotten so accustomed to me doing that with every single thing over and over again. And we have a conversation, and the conversations are they're not really taxing because the kids are telling me a lot of what they think as well. But it's really cool to see the shift. I wish that in university that was more common. Even
Right.
just the idea of critical thought, and I know a lot of people think that critical means like just dissing whatever, which is different than critical thought.
Right.
But just that idea of presenting that as a standard, and it's coming into language in grade schools, but it's not a standard thing. And even when it's included within things, we as educators, if we don't think like that, we still can't even present it in a way that provides too much application.
One of the big areas that certainly comes into play, and I don't want to go too far, down a rabbit hole of that idea, is repertoire.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the things that I've heard you say several times now is you can learn. There's not only one song that teaches this concept. There are many
Mm-hmm.
songs that can teach the concept. You just have to think about it.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what a crazy challenge it is then to get educators to start thinking about not just, okay, we're going to learn this song, but what actually does this song mean?
Yeah. And it's like you kind of have to get it at both ends, right? We want professors to be doing that with students, but there's a lot of stuff I learned after I was completely out of school. I feel like school planted the seed, But how we engage as professional communities when we're out means that teachers shift their way of thinking, which affects the kids, and it just grows and grows and grows at the same time as working on the top. Because yeah, like you said, it's just a matter of just not even thinking to ask certain questions. And I have to kind of add to that, it's not even not thinking to ask certain questions, it's just not thinking to ask them in a certain context, right? So like you go and you learn like your advanced theory, and you learn these things where you're really having to analyze a lot, that level of analyzing, and we have to learn the history of the composers that are considered standard within our canon, and all these, all these really cool anecdotes we learn because of how deeply we've delved into their lives and how their lives influence their work. And that is actually there, but what people don't really think about is, we can do that to the other stuff, right? And it's just like, whoa. But like my culture is the other stuff, right? So it needs to be like really drilled in that that's just a thing we do broadly, not just for canon, or not just for whatever we consider at the top of the hierarchy of what should be learned about.
Right. I think another analogy, I'm pretty sure it was from you, was why do we know that what the painting was on the wall when this composer,
It was
wrote
something
this
like that. But
piece of
we don't
music?
even know the country in Africa that
Right.
this
Right.
was
Exactly.
from.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, when you literally put those two side by side, it's like it's crazy that that we're not
Right,
thinking of it along those lines, and
right.
it isn't the other, it's not the other stuff, it's all just the stuff,
It's all the stuff.
yeah. So some of it is maybe we don't know what we don't know, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a matter of figuring that out. But maybe how do we get adults, okay, kids might be easier to go down that road, but how do we get adults who are mid-career
Yeah.
to think differently and to think about what they don't know?
Yeah, another aspect of it is just like socialization and what we normalize. And that's why I say, like in our professional communities, we have to normalize some different stuff. And we have to talk to one another about different things, and we have to be uncomfortable being uncomfortable with something being brought up that we didn't think of. And it's okay to do that with one another, and then just find out how to move forward through it. But that is going to have to be a broad thing, is normalizing a certain type of engagement and highlighting our blind spots and our gaps and our things that sometimes even when we do know, we're just choosing. So we all have defaults, right? And depending on what's going on, we're in survival mode. Like I know COVID is putting a lot of teachers in survival mode, um, and with good reason, because there's just so much going on. Um, so how can we normalize and encourage and reinforce a certain type of thinking that changes what your survival level norm is? Like if your survival level is like, oh, I still ask questions, and even if I'm tired and overwhelmed, or I'm concerned about my safety, as many literally are right now, um, what I can get in is based on me just being accustomed to asking certain types of questions, then I think that'll be a shift. And we can get teachers who have been teaching forever, or teachers who are mid-career, to just get used to asking about what they're doing. And then sometimes when you make a choice where you just kind of rest it back on what was easier for you, you can acknowledge it and go, oh, I did that, and that can't be how I operate. Like I have to do something different. I have to really call a spade, and then move forward from that. But just having that type of reflection being regular and okay. Like I did a presentation, and what somebody really liked was just that I let people talk a lot in the chat, and I engage their questions. How many presentations do we go to where you sit and get, or you move and you are active, but it's still getting, right?
Mhm.
And the person who's presenting doesn't give a lot of space for whatever comes from you and what you can process from you. If we have more of that, then I feel like that will make that more of our normal. But there's some pretty hefty barriers to making that a thing, which again is part of why I do what I do. So when I go and present, I present a certain way that I hope people appreciate, that I think is effective for really processing through things, that I hope becomes more frequent and more normal for people.
I think like there's this cultural fear of we're scared to not know. We're scared to be the one in the room that doesn't know, and then we're
Mm-hmm.
scared to ask the question of maybe somebody who does know, because one, we might think everybody else knows, and we're the quote dumb one in the room.
Yeah.
But also, if it falls into our personal uncomfort level,
Mm-hmm.
um, that we're scared to ask it because we are personally uncomfortable with a topic, that we are scared to then ask someone else about it. Especially when it comes to a life experience type thing. Maybe it's not just about, the question of a music theory question, right?
Yeah.
I want to know about your life experience as a black woman
Mm-hmm.
who, like, that, going back to the university question, like, I think that's really interesting context that I would have no way of ever knowing that.
Right, right.
So that, like, but that's where people are uncomfortable. I mean, I don't, none of them asking a question here. If I'm just kind of seeing if that is that kind of where your line of thinking is with the way that you do these presentations and talk to folks. Like, it's okay to be uncomfortable and ask the question. Is that fair?
It's not only okay, but like there's spaces for it to be absolutely necessary. Like, there's the idea of discomfort and growth. You can grow without being, without experiencing discomfort. But in regards to the stuff that we tend to be talking about, like there's going to be discomfort. But I think it's really important to really know more about your identity, how you identify all parts of yourself, and how people might identify you externally, and how that factors into the level of discomfort you have to experience. So, for example, I, as a black woman, usually not around very many black people as I go through music ed spaces and go to trainings and go to conferences and all this stuff. There's some things that happen, like microaggressions, or just like really just weird stuff, or erasure or omission or whatever, and the discomfort is there. People who are racially minoritized tend to have have like a baseline tolerance of discomfort that those who are not don't have in that same area, right? And so, like, and if I put it really bluntly, like, there's some things I just don't have the luxury at all. Like, I'm gonna have to deal with it. There's no, you know what I mean? Like, Breonna Taylor dies, and legally, law wise, everything's fine, right? As a black woman, like, that is the discomfort that, like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't have an option, right? And so, to get people to understand that the discomfort is not because we're trying to punish, it's just literally, like, encourages conversations in the racial equity framework that I've been fortunate enough to train in. Like, you have to build a muscle. It just literally is a necessity. And when you don't, you have to understand that those around you, by necessity, have to have a stronger muscle than you. I think I'm kind of processing as I'm talking about it, but you know, and then they have to deal with that without support or whatever. And it extends to our colleagues, it extends to our students, it extends to a lot wider stuff. But it's just so important to understand how much being comfortable has been normalized depending on the identity point, right? So, like, as a white man, not dealing with like patriarchy and whiteness might be a level of comfort that you've experienced, right? As a
Right.
cisgender woman, not dealing with any like discomfort around being trans or non-binary might be something that I just haven't, might be, but I have to look at that and I have to do something about it because we're all here, right?
I like that. You almost said, like, if we figure out our baseline, right? And like, you gotta, let's identify it and
Yeah.
own it, and then learn from it.
Yeah.
Um,
I know
one
it's
of the
gonna
words
happen.
that's, well, exactly. So one of the words that you said that I just think is important to go back to and make this point because I don't think enough people think of it in this way.
Hmm.
You said you're minoritized.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
such an important word.
Yeah.
Can you explain why you use that word as opposed to saying I'm a minority?
Yeah. Thank you so much for picking up on that. Um, I wish I could remember the source. I love to like point people back to the source of where I get stuff. I did some reading and thankfully got to the term racially minoritized. So it speaks to the fact that Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian people, I'm going to speak for our society, even though it happens broadly, are racialized a certain way. Regardless of what I call myself, the broader society is going to look at me as Black, no matter what I call myself. And because the broader society is going to look at me as Black, I see some structural and systemic things. I see that it might be harder for me to get a home loan. I see my home would be appraised higher. I'm sorry, would be appraised lower if there's some very obvious references to my Blackness in the home. I see the disparity in mortality rates of Black mothers. I have kids. I was keenly aware of that, right? I see the disparity in educational outcomes for my children within their school district based on data. I see all these things that are structural, that are external, and happen to that happen to tie into my Blackness. Even though minority as the literal smaller number does not describe my presence within my school district. White students are the minority in my school district, number wise. But being minoritized means because of that like external categorization. This is the experience that happens to you. I recently found the phrase global majority.
Okay.
And when we're talking about Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian people, we're the global majority, right? And so we have to look at, even when we're in these spaces where we're not even the smallest number, right? There are things that happen, and that's the minoritization versus minority, because minority is like a literal smaller number, and it
Right.
speaks to, it's like a diminution, and it speaks to like a lesserness that I personally don't have, and my culture doesn't have, right? So yeah.
And it is a, I don't know where I read this because I agree with you. Like I like to point back to the source, but I don't remember where I read this one. Somebody had defined it as when you are born as and you literally are just born and you are a minute old, there's you're a baby. That's what you are.
Yeah.
But you're not born and you're a minority. Like you're not, that's not stamped on you when you're born. Whoever said this said it far more eloquently than that. But the point being, I mean, this social cultural construct that has been put on people. That's why I one of the takeaways that I got from your panel discussion I mentioned earlier was rethinking verbiage,
Yeah.
and that very specific one is I'm thinking about that constantly and have changed my verbiage in that area because I do think that's so important.
Yeah, and there's, I think it's important to know when to change. There are gonna be some terms that you'll just have to find out because things are in flux. But there are some things like that become necessary to let go of in a way that's very very clear. And I
Right.
feel that way about minority and there's a lot of stuff we use euphemistically or in other ways that communicate some stuff broadly that not only doesn't need to be communicated but actually isn't even accurate.
And checking out the Facebook group is a place to see some of those discussions
Yeah,
about
yeah.
some of those things I've seen. So, um, last question is kind of, if you're a music teacher out there watching this, and you're saying, okay, I've got to rethink. This is kind of a wake up for me to rethink what I'm doing in my classroom and how I'm reaching my students. Do you have any recommendations of some besides joining the Facebook group, besides
Mm-hmm.
visiting the website, because that's super important. What's some takeaways you might have, some actionable items of recommendations for folks who want to do something but maybe don't know what to do?
Yeah, so I think getting some baseline vocabulary is really important. So doing some reading and listening and conversation to just get enough of a common language to even speak to what you're trying to do is very important. There is so much stuff out there, but we do have a resources page that has some things that are not us that don't just talk specifically about music ed, but talk about things like racial construction and minoritization and all this stuff on our resources page. So just like getting the vocabulary and understanding what the phenomena are and how they're described, just like gives you tools to work with. And then building relationship with others that are doing the same thing. And with, I'm hesitant to say with people who aren't like, they always say, go find somebody who's not like you. Nobody wants to be like somebody's project person,
Right.
right?
Right.
But you can work on building relationships of solidarity with people who are trying to address the same things you are. And that will broaden and grow your circle, but it'll also get you in a space where you're engaging with people who are trying to keep one another accountable for moving forward in the same way. And then it's really important to look at the way you're engaging with your students and parents and staff, and just for me, students first. Take a look at those relationships and find some ways to do more learning about them, not in a tell me what to fix kind of way, but like what can I observe that I don't necessarily observe in dealing with students just because I haven't been thinking about it in that way. I'll speak for my own teaching experience. I've had to be so intentional because the demand of like getting here to there in 2 seconds and handling all the kids and making sure to get the standards taught and all of that stuff. It kind of can put you in a space of like kids go here, kids go there, do what I said, absorb this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to kind of flip the script on that and take some time to build relationship in kids and make sure you keep in mind the amount of learning that we have to do that's not specifically in music ed, but is in like all these things that frame it, right? So it could be something like super simple. I had a colleague who there was a little black girl who came to school and her hair was braided and it was all done. And the colleague tried to put her hand in her hair. I was like, no, you don't put your hands in little black girl's hair, and you especially don't put it in like freshly done hair that their mama spent like 2 hours doing the night before. But like there's all this stuff that I know culturally, and the colleague's like, why is that a thing? And it's there's stuff outside of like your content
Sure.
area that is going to inform how you're engaging in your content area. And I don't think people always understand it's important to look at. And I don't think they really believe how much is going to change how they teach and how they engage with everybody.
Yeah, it's I think it's more than just in the class. It's beyond the classroom. It's just how you're going to engage with people in the world.
Yeah.
Um,
And how you understand, it's like you said, we don't all have the same lived experience, right? But maybe you can have enough understanding to know like why someone would be coming from a certain place,
right.
or why something would be a concern, or why something might cause harm. Like maybe there's something that you wouldn't bring into the classroom and you had no idea. But if we have a broader general knowledge and broader vocabulary around what is going on all around us in these areas, then, it doesn't seep into everything because it's already there. But it's like putting a black light on all the stuff. You get
Right,
to
right,
see
right,
it
right,
all.
right. Well, okay, that's an odd note to end on. But that said, no, you make some really fantastic points, and I think we could have this conversation for quite a bit longer because I know we just scratched the surface. So I'll remind folks, visit the website. Absolutely take a look at the Facebook group and as well the other things you're doing on social media. Brandi, thank you so much for taking the time to talk
You're
today. This was
very
fantastic.
welcome. Nice
And
talking to you.
great talking to you. And for everybody else, we will join you again soon. Thanks a lot.